What's up guys, this is Andrew Rose, and today we're going to be doing a breakdown of my new track with Drake Hoffman called Fall Out. So this track, for those of you who haven't heard it yet, well I guess you would have just heard the drop during the intro there, but if you haven't heard the whole song yet, I strongly recommend that you go stream it. The link will be available in the description on whatever platform you prefer. And you can also download the song for free to use in your DJ sets or whatever listening if you prefer to just have MP3 files. You may have also noticed that a visualizer came out for this on Wednesday or Tuesday. You can watch that as well if you haven't yet. There'll be a link for that as well in the description. Now, we've been super happy with the reception of this, especially on SoundCloud. It's been supported by a lot of big DJs and artists, most notably probably Jacknife, who inspired the track with his remix of Addiction. That's what it was based off of. The song, yeah, especially locally for people who know Drake and I, he's kind of the Riddim guy and I'm the G-House guy locally. So here in Vancouver, they were like, some people, might have been thinking this is kind of like the Rezz Malaa Criminals collab. We actually started this song in August. Like I said, it was inspired by Jacknife, not Rezz. So while Drake is a Riddim artist and obviously loves Rezz a lot, and I like Rezz too, and I'm a big fan of Malaa, obviously. It was actually inspired by Jacknife. So neither of them, but it is a similar collab in terms of our styles coming together and the actual sound of the track. So, but basically it started because we're both label mates on my record label Stir Fry Records, and I came to him asking if this was something he was interested in doing. It's a little out of my wheelhouse, doing lower tempo. So I came to him with a demo that was a drop with some presets from different sample packs, mostly the Confessions Revolutions 2 from Zen World, but also some other ones, and this drum pattern I made. So let's listen to the drum pattern first. And then for the kind of B section, it just has this ride in there. So pretty simple. I mean, I listened to a bunch of like Rezz stuff and Jacknife stuff to try to get a feel for what their rhythms were like for their drum programming. Pretty similar to G-House in terms of, the 4 on the floor beat and the claps, more of a clap focus. It almost reminds me of like doing the if you've heard my song It's On Me, which is in the style of Lodge 21 with having clap fills and kind of hi-hat trills and stuff like that. It reminds me of that. And then I think, the toms are also really important. I probably had more toms in the original demo that we removed in place for kind of the tom synth that you hear. The other big thing to note is like that open hi-hat that's going on just, very occasionally on the offbeat. Very similar to that Lodge 21 type of style of drum programming, actually. And then having the ride in the second half on actually every beat, but really drives, the power for the second half of the drop. So that's why we had that in there. Pretty simple stuff. In the intro, the only thing that changes is that it gets high passed going into the break. The other thing I want to note is that we got some feedback from Barely Alive to add in these small rides or crashes on the one of every other bar so that it was more obvious when we had hit the one, because the vocal wasn't really quantized or positioned in time, and that was on purpose because we wanted it to sound more organic. But one of the things you sacrifice in doing that is that it kind of gets lost when there isn't like a driving rhythm in the break. So that's why we added that. Now, you don't always need to do that. Like I think Life and Death by Rezz and Death Pack doesn't really have any driving rhythmic information, I guess you would call it. And so kind of like the drop just hits you out of nowhere. And that's the style they were going for, but I don't think that we were purposely, intentionally trying to do that. So it was good feedback regardless. So I'll start with the drop as well for the synths, because that again was what was in the demo, and we'll listen to these different components together. Actually, before I do that, let's go over some of the drum not programming, but some of the drum mixing, since that's important. So listen to this loop again, and we'll just skip forward to the section with all the drums playing. So if we see here, we got a perk bus, which pretty much everything is going into. Some stuff is EQ'd separately, but for the most part, it's all just in this bus, which has a sausage fattener on it with high color and then a fair amount of fatness. High color, I think, adds a lot of character, so let's listen to it without all that. So it saturates it a lot. And then this reverb, which is a very small space reverb. If we look at it, yeah, relatively small space, barely any decay, and very low wetness to fill up the space, frequency spectrum, and the spatial spectrum, stereo spectrum, that's what's called. Fill up the stereo spectrum with the rest of the elements intact. And then this EQ, I believe, is just a low cut to make sure it's not competing with the kick or anything else. So if you didn't have that on, it would be a little bit muddy, but we do for that reason. And that's pretty much all that's going on. I don't believe there's anything on this kick other than different EQs that trigger on and off at different points. And we have this very fat, obnoxious kick. I don't know where we got it from, if it was from Drake or not, but let me make sure I didn't just do anything there. There we go. So that's all it for the drums. Nothing super complicated there. It's just important to make sure that you're always bussing everything, basically. That's the thing I think is most important when it comes to drums. So we'll move on to the basses now, which sound like this. And again, these all came from different presets that Drake then did a bunch of sound design on. So we'll look at them out of So one thing you'll notice is that we actually don't have the what's it called? We don't have the sub frequencies EQ'd out here because we EQ them out in the mixing file. So we got just the raw sub alone and the full bass sounds with their sub still like allowed in, and then in the mixing files when we took them out. So you know, this was a 3-stage process between production, mixing, and mastering, so that's why that looks like that. But let's take a look into some of the sounds. You also notice a bunch of samples that aren't used. I'll just purge those real quick. Okay, there we go. So now we're looking at this guy, which is actually based off of Basic, which is a one in Confessions of Revolutions. So I think the original is just a sustained, and then Drake turned it into this enveloped. So you know, this LFO basically is enveloping the wavetable position of this guy, as well as the cutoff and resonance of this filter. End of the sub and whatnot. And let's see if there's anything here. It's also doing some stuff to this EQ, so the frequency response for these guys, and the cutoff for this comb filter. So a ton of filters basically on this, just really ruining the sounds to make this very loud, very in-your-face sound that we get here. And I believe it's not auto. So if we look at this automation, this is another trick that Drake brought to the table. It's actually automating the detunement, because as you see, there's 16 voice unison, but they're actually detuned to 0. And then this automation is basically this little flick here is detuning them, which makes that effect. And that's pretty much all that happens with that guy. Next, we'll go into this one, which is this guy. And this is another preset from Evolution of Sound called Clock that we've screwed around with a bunch. So it normally sounds like this. And yeah, not much to say about this guy, other than we automate his speed over here. And then that sound, which is all wavetable, I believe. Let's see. You'll see the wavetables here, and then becomes more clean, I guess, here, which makes kind of the more resonant sine wave sound, whereas the original position was dirtier. Next we have this guy, which is a very old sound that I use in pretty much all of my tracks, which is Bounce House. I've actually made a version of this preset that I like more now, but at the time we were making this was the main one that we had, and you can barely hear it. And it's just meant to suck into the main growl sound. So that's all it's really doing throughout the thing there. And again, another preset that's just been screwed around with by Drake so that it sounds similar to the other sounds. And this is just pitch automation that's doing this. Nothing's really changing in the rest of the sound. Constantly at one note. It's just pitch bending up. And I believe it doesn't do it over here. Their pitch is down, and I think we did the full 12, but didn't like it as much as doing 7. Normally 12 is what you want for doing these pitch bends, because that's a full octave, which means that it's obviously in key. 7 is usually, I think 7 is a 5th, so it still works as well, but obviously do it by ear, and in this kind of genre it doesn't matter as much. Then last we have this tom sounding one, which I called Heartbeat, but it is called tom style, and not much changed about it. Again, it's just kind of acting as like a heartbeat. So that is all of that with the drums. So you'll see one of the things that I made sure to do was to line up different hits. So when you hear this clock, you hear all these claps. Yeah. And so for the rest of the song, the only one of the drop synths that plays at other times is that tom one. Now there are other basses that we use in the second drop, so let's get to those. Now this was really a fun experience because this was basically Drake's doing, was coming up with the second drop when he asked me how I felt about doing a second drop, and I think it really adds a lot. So all these fills are actually made by Drake in his own serum on his laptop, which he then bounced. Whoop. were all made by Drake in his laptop on his CRM, and then bounced to audio, sent over to mine while we were in the studio, and then we were working off of my desktop computer as kind of the main interface. But it sounds like this. So sorry if the levels are really off there. You know, certain one of those fills are way quieter. That is addressed in the final version of the song because, again, of the mixing, which is actually, this song probably had a lot more done in the mixing step than previous ones because of all the bouncing audio that had to happen. But we'll pay attention to this guy. Just a single sustained note. And it looks like this. So it's a saw, basically a super saw bass that we used here, and does a bunch of tricks like. So these little pitch bends. Because I felt like, you know, originally we just had it on a single note for most of the drop, and it was really boring. So these little pitch bends add a lot to it, and then filling it in with, you know, whether it be the toms here or these bigger fills that Drake designed. It was really just making sure that it never gets boring, because it is like a nasty big sound, but just keeping it fresh throughout. And then this B section goes back. And I think for the main drop, like the first drop in that B section, it was just doing automation on those different bass synths that really made it stand out. So the final bass that we have is this classic Rezz bass that I use in. Something I want to note though is that it's being automated to open up. So you see here to get dirtier. So now what about all of the effects being used on the different basses? Well, if we go back to this first drop. So we're going to take a look at the growl one first. And we'll just throw this on here. And we'll turn off its effects chain. Sounds like this. And so that's just the bass bus, but it also has its own effects chain here. So this is what it sounds like. And I believe I don't have any of these plugins. They're Drake, so that's why they aren't taking any effect. But if we look at actual bass bus, again, like with my drums, I tend to bus everything that's similar so that they have the same level of compression, the same reverbs, same EQing, etc. And putting reverb on basses was something that I was taught as well from my friend from the duo Ratman and Bobbin. Actually, I always thought that basses sound better when they were dry, but actually it adds just having this kind of reverb on it that is a bit. It's still small, but it has a slightly longer decay than the drum one. It just makes it fill out more. And then I don't have LFO tool, so I actually use Kickstart, but I think I put it on all of these guys, or actually I didn't, and I did it in the mixing file. And then this stereo enhancer is doing nothing. I might have used it for volume automation or something like that later, but it's not really doing anything evident. Then this guy. The only thing that's added is a sausage fattener, which I think turns on in the second half of the drop when when the wavetable changes. It becomes much quieter, so that's why I had that automated to come on. Nothing to talk about on the swoop one, and then for this guy, this heartbeat one, it's over here. So this guy's got a lot of stuff on it. So he has 2 sausage fatteners on him in the course of this chain. Both are about the same settings. And if the sausage fattener would get out of the way. So that's all that's going on there. Let's take a listen to Smash here. So again, most of these aren't doing anything. Sausage fattener is. So doubling up on that guy with the same settings actually as the other one. And other than that, it's pretty much nothing else going on there. Oh, one thing too about the Rezz is that in the second break, it gets a melody, which sounds like this. And that complements these top plucks. So let's look at these guys first. Which is this Aladdin preset, again, just tweaked. I think I tweaked it to have a slower attack, so it comes in slower. That's pretty much all I think I did, and maybe reverb. And then this guy, which I love using all the time, Poppy, and I did the same thing where I had to elongate the attack because it was making too much of a noise when it first comes on. And I think I had to drown it out as well with a lot more reverb than it originally has, because it sounds kind of more like a what's called tropical house kind of lead if you don't. So those are the main changes I made there, but fits in really well. Sounds very epic, so I like that a lot. And that was just something, again, from observing the other tracks by Jacknife and Malaa and the other songs that I've made, that I knew that would make sense. The vocal we found off of Splice, and it's kind of this announcer.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets may be advised to evacuate.
So this is what we're doing to it, a sausage fattener, so I'll take all this stuff off.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout,
Just making it louder.
fallout, people living around potential targets may be...
So a high decay reverb from this chamber on CLA vocals. And I'm not going to turn Blood Overdrive on, but effects.
In the case of nuclear or radiological
So these
fallout,
two are going to make this kind of Billie Eilish effect, which is what I was looking for originally when I stumbled across it, but you hear it here.
targets may be advised to evacuate.
So that's what it sounds like. Evacuate.
Protection from radio...
So that's just with the effects on, and then I think later on I have it with...
Increased chances of survival.
At some point I have it with the Blood Overdrive, I'm pretty
between
sure.
you and the fallout particles, an area...
Maybe not. So, yeah, that's basically just identifying, you know, the phrases that we wanted and what we wanted to have these kind of creepy effects on. Other than that, pretty simple. In the build-up,
So biological will increase your family's chances of survival.
I think that might be it where we have.
Of survival.
So there's the Blood Overdrive, and then a filter comes, a low-pass filter comes in on it there. That slowly opens up as we're pitch automating it up and, you know, having and then back straight to normal
Chances of survival.
into the drop. And that's, again, pretty much the exact same everywhere. I'll cover this second build-up because it changes.
Increased chances of survival. Evacuate.
So yeah, not much to say there other than it's just a cool sounding vocal. That's why we used it. So next up, the horn. I believe this is from Kashmir 7 Skies pack, Brass Stab 2. And I had to do a little bit of tweaking, mostly on attack and release, I believe. But other than that, let's see how it was processed. So it's actually going into the bass bus, which is interesting. I think this, if I remember correctly, the side chaining has a big effect on it. So let's take all this stuff off. This sausage fattener is doing a lot. And you'll notice in this song that I actually keep the side chaining on in the breaks when there's no kick.
In the case of nuclear or radio, or in the middle of a large building.
Over here.
The more distance.
And I think that gives a pumping feeling. It's kind of like the old progressive house. So I just like that effect, and that's why I kept it in. Now, some other things to notice are the detail that's in the effects. I think this is super important. You'll notice that there's actually a background effect on the entire time of the song, and that adds atmosphere along with the vocal. So this thing here is just going on like the entire song. Then your regular transitionary sweeps. And again, this Blau Escape one also has the pumping sidechain thing on it, which I think fit in with the rest of the elements going on. And then we also have, paired with the vocal, so I'll turn the vocal back on for this.
Protection from
kind of adding to the atmosphere. So these two elements are working with each other really well.
In the middle of a large building. The more distance and time you put between you and the fallout particles, the better. Hazmat. Increased chances of survival.
And so like these two effects are doing so much for the pre-drop. Just having this reverse and this kind of creaking door effect, I think does so much for it. And you can tell how much work that these effects are doing in this section. Coming right after the drop, there's enough going on that it still manages to hold your attention going into
In the case of nuclear or radiological,
the second break. So that's something I wanted to acknowledge. We add another riser here in the second drop that's not in there for the first one, as well. Third riser. And another additional build-up there. Which in mixing I do lower the volume of quite substantially. So that is kind of the entire production of the song. Now I'll likely do a part 2 where I go into the actual mixing file, because like I said, more so than any other track, there was more going on in the mixing. But I hope that gave you some insight on different tips and the kind of process. This was a really fun song to make, a really cool collaboration. Being in a literal studio while making it, it was a ton of fun. So that's all for this video. Again, if you want to stream or download the song, the links will be in the description. And if you give me a shout out on your Instagram by sharing the song from Spotify or whatever, or SoundCloud, and you put it into your Instagram story and tag me at XanderRoseOfficial, I will repost you to mine. So to give you a little shout out for everyone to see. Well, that's it. And as always, happy dancing.
evacuate.